In my last video, I went over the Kalam cosmological argument, which is one of the arguments used in the case for the existence of God. And in this video, I'll be presenting and responding to 4 objections that are typically made against the Kalam. So without further ado, let's get into it. Objection 1. If everything that exists has a cause, then what is God's cause? To start off, I want to say that this objection is not made by anyone who truly understands the Kalam argument. Nowhere in the Kalam does it state that everything has a cause. Instead, it says that everything that begins to exist has a cause. This premise says nothing about things that do not begin to exist, and as such, it leaves open the possibility that there could be things that didn't begin to exist and that don't have causes. Now, to some people, phrasing the first premise this way almost seems like special pleading. In other words, it seems like the proponent of the argument is just slapping on the phrase begins to exist because God is typically thought of as not having a beginning, and so he can just get a get out of jail free card. But this isn't special pleading for God. In fact, this premise alone leaves open the possibility that the universe could be eternal and therefore not necessarily have a cause. However, it's the support for the second premise that the universe began to exist, which casts doubt upon the universe being eternal. Objection 2. The argument does nothing to show that a personal God who cares about us exists, let alone that the God of any particular religion exists. I hear this brought up all the time, and I'm just a little bit annoyed by it, because almost always the proponent of the Kalam already knows this. The Kalam cosmological argument isn't intended to prove that a personal God exists or that the God of any particular religion exists. It's only intended to show that there's a cause to the universe, and as such, it must have certain properties. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful enough to create the universe, and some have argued personal, though in my last video I said those are less certain arguments. Now, of course, there are key properties of God that this argument doesn't prove, like that God is all-knowing or morally perfect. But this argument is typically just one out of many arguments in a cumulative case for theism. No one argument is used to prove every single aspect of God, but rather different arguments are used to prove different aspects of God. Objection 3. Things begin to exist without a cause all the time. According to quantum physics, extremely small virtual particles are constantly popping in and out of existence randomly, without any kind of known cause. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I'm incredibly knowledgeable about quantum physics, because in all honesty, I don't know that much about quantum physics, but I can't help but echo what others have said in response to this, namely that these particles don't come into existence out of absolutely nothing. Rather, they come into existence out of the quantum vacuum, which is a sea of fluctuating energy. To quote David Albert, a theoretical physicist and philosopher at Columbia University, the fact that virtual particles can pop in and out of existence over time as those quantum fields rearrange themselves is not a whit more mysterious than the fact that fists can pop in and out of existence over time as my fingers rearrange themselves. And none of these poppings, if you look at them right, amounts to anything even remotely in the neighborhood of a creation from nothing. Objection 4. The first premise is based on the fallacy of composition. It assumes that because everything in the universe has a cause, therefore the universe as a whole has a cause. The fallacy of composition is a logical fallacy in which you say that because every part of something has a certain property, therefore the thing as a whole has that same property. For example, every atom in an elephant is light. Therefore, the elephant itself is light. You can see the problem here. I don't know how this objection was ever even created, but for some reason it seems to be really popular. But nowhere in the Kalam is it argued that because everything in the universe has a cause, therefore the universe as a whole must have a cause. The reason for thinking that whatever begins to exist has a cause is because 1, something cannot come into being out of absolutely nothing, and 2, if things could come into being out of absolutely nothing, then we should see all sorts of things constantly popping into existence from absolutely nothing. But we don't see that, which points again to the fact that something cannot come into being from nothing. This seems to be another objection that only arises when people don't fully understand the argument to begin with. So that's all for this video. I hope to have shown that these 4 objections to the Kalam don't hold up when placed under scrutiny. And of course, I'm not perfect. If you think I made an error in my reasoning, then without a doubt leave a comment or post a video response. I don't look into this stuff just so I can try and beat others in an argument. I look into this stuff because I want to know the truth, and if I'm making an error in my reasoning, I want to know. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to share this video with your friends and subscribe to my channel. And if you feel like you have something to say, leave it in the comments. In my next video on arguments for and against the existence of God, I'll be looking at some more objections to the Kalam cosmological argument, which all revolve around the fallacy of equivocation. So stay tuned for that video, and I'll see you then. Just a forewarning, this video is going to be a little bit more technical than my previous Kalam videos. In my last video, I went over some objections to the Kalam cosmological argument and showed that they don't really hold up when placed under scrutiny. And in this video, I'll be going over some more objections to the Kalam argument, but this time focused specifically on the fallacy of equivocation. If you're unfamiliar with it, the fallacy of equivocation is a logical fallacy in which the same word or phrase is used multiple times to mean different things, but the argument treats the word as if it's meaning the same thing all throughout the argument. Probably the most common example of this fallacy is the following argument. Premise 1, Socrates was Greek. Premise 2, Greek is a language. Conclusion, Socrates is a language. The same word, Greek, is used to mean 2 different things, but the argument is put forward as if the 2 uses of the word Greek mean the same thing. Now, to defeat the claim of equivocation, all that you need to do is show that the argument uses one singular definition for the word or phrase in question all throughout the argument. Many people claim the Kalam commits the fallacy of equivocation in not just one way, but in 4 different ways. I'm gonna try and show that these claims fail when placed under scrutiny. And don't worry, I'll have the important information in text on the screen, so if I go too fast, you can just pause the video. Objection 1. In premise 2, the word universe is defined as all matter, space, and time, but in the conclusion, the word universe is defined as everything that exists, has existed, and will ever exist. This is probably the worst of the 4 equivocation claims, which is why I'm getting it out of the way first. I actually don't know how someone could come up with this claim. The word universe in the Kalam refers to space-time and all its contents, or to put it perhaps more simply, all of physical reality. Even a multiverse, if it existed, would be included in this definition of universe. But nowhere is the word universe taken to mean absolutely everything that is, was, and ever will be. It seems like such a claim just comes out of absolutely nowhere. So maybe some things really can come into being out of nothing. In fact, if that was how the word universe was defined in the Kalam, then the Kalam would be self-contradictory. How could something be the cause of absolutely everything? That thing is itself something that exists, and so if it created absolutely everything, it would have to be the cause of itself, which is absurd. So to recap, the word universe in the Kalam always refers to space-time and its contents all throughout the argument. Objection 2. In premise 1, the word cause is defined as material cause, but in the conclusion, the word cause refers to something other than a material cause, as it's impossible for the universe to have had a material cause. To show why this objection fails, we have to be familiar with the difference between a material cause and a so-called efficient cause. Aristotle separated causes into 4 different categories, although only 2 categories are relevant to this claim: material and efficient. A material cause is the stuff out of which something is made, the material from which it comes. So for example, the block of marble is the material cause out of which a marble statue is created. Similarly, the material cause of a painting is the paint and canvas. On the other hand, an efficient cause is the thing which brings its effect into being. It's the primary source of its effect. For example, the marble statue's efficient cause is the sculptor, and the painting's efficient cause is the painter, or the artist. So then, how is the word cause defined in the Kalam? Well, it's this second definition, efficient cause, which is used in the Kalam. The argument can be restated as whatever begins to exist has an efficient cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has an efficient cause. So to recap, the word cause in the Kalam argument always refers to an efficient cause. Objection 3. In premise 1, the phrase begins to exist means begins from a rearrangement of pre-existing material. But in premise 2, begins to exist means begins from no pre-existing material. As you can probably see, this claim is extremely similar to the last claim, although it is technically different, because rather than claiming that the argument equivocates on the word cause, it claims that the argument equivocates on the phrase begins to exist. This is going to get a bit technical, so bear with me here. Remember that all you need to do to defeat the claim that an argument commits the fallacy of equivocation is to show that the phrase in question is defined the same way all throughout the argument. So all we need to do is have one unified definition for begins to exist. And here I'm going to quote directly from William Lane Craig, because I think he gives the most concise, albeit technical, definition of begins to exist. According to Craig, something X begins to exist at some time t, if and only if 1. X exists at t, 2. There's no time before t at which X exists, and 3. There is no state of affairs in the actual world in which X exists timelessly. Now, in case you're a bit confused, I'll go over each part of this definition. First, X exists at t. This seems pretty obvious. It would be nonsensical to say that something came into existence at a time when it did not exist. That doesn't make any sense. Second, there is no time before t at which X exists. This also seems pretty obvious. If something comes into being at a certain time, that implies that it did not exist at any time before the time when it came into being. Third, there is no state of affairs in the actual world in which X exists timelessly. Now this one's a bit confusing, but it makes sense if you really think about it. Imagine, if you can, a being which exists timelessly without the universe, but enters into time at the moment when the universe is created. In that situation, the being would exist at the first moment of time, and as such, there would be no time prior at which that being existed, but it would be nonsensical to say that that being came into existence at the first moment of time. So to recap, the phrase begins to exist is always defined as I quoted previously, all throughout the argument. Objection 4. In premise 1, the phrase begins to exist means begins to exist a finite time ago, after a point when it did not exist. But in premise 2, begins to exist means begins to exist a finite time ago, but which exists at every point in time. Once again, we have a claim that the phrase begins to exist commits the fallacy of equivocation. Now, I could refute this by restating the singular definition of begins to exist that I stated in the last objection. So why am I bringing this claim up? Well, it's because I'm starting to see a trend with some of these equivocation claims. It seems like all people are really doing is just pointing out that two things which supposedly both began to exist are different than each other in some ways. Obviously, there are differences between the universe coming into being and many of the things we see around us coming into being, as these claims of equivocation point out. While many of the things we see beginning to exist have material causes and had some prior time at which those things didn't exist, the universe would not have had any material cause, and there would not have been a prior time at which the universe did not exist. But that doesn't show that the argument commits the fallacy of equivocation. All these different things fall under the category of having begun to exist as defined by the argument. The argument uses one unified definition of begins to exist, and that means that the claim of equivocation completely falls apart. So, that is all for this video. I hope to show that the Kalam does not equivocate on the words universe, cause, or the phrase begins to exist. But of course, I'm not perfect. If you think I made a mistake in my reasoning, then without a doubt, leave a comment or some kind of video response. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to share it with your friends and subscribe for more. And if you feel like you have something to say, leave it in the comments. In my next video on arguments for and against the existence of God, I'll be moving on from the Kalam cosmological argument and moving towards the Leibnizian cosmological argument. So, stay tuned for that video, and I'll see you then.